to talk. Obviously, the point of this is to get some education out there to you all and for you all to ask questions. So at any point, if you have questions, feel free to let us know. That's why we're here to answer them. So you can ask them out loud. You can send them into the chat feature if you are familiar with that on Zoom. It's at the bottom. You can send them in that way, but we want to answer any questions that you have. So with that being said, we'll keep our fingers crossed for no dogs barking in the background, no ambulances, anything like that. But we're looking forward to having this session today. All right. All right. So, really quickly, I mean, we kind of touched about it at the beginning, but 2020 was such a unique year for us. There are so many different things that we were juggling with, the world was juggling with, and we just want to thank everyone that was able to take part last year and for your help in making our events go really smooth. We had a ton of compliments from our players and just about the experience that they had, the ability to be able to play in our events and not and so we just really want to thank you for those of you that were able to help out last year, and we're really looking forward to this year. And there'll definitely be some of the same kind of COVID policies and procedures in place. Maybe not as stringent, but we'll definitely still have some COVID impact in our season, no doubt. I can't think of any particular rulings of note that happened last year, but I'm sure there are some. I think the only one I could really remember off the top of my head that was any kind of I guess noteworthy was we had a one ball ruling incident at our senior match play with Randy Lewis, and I think Alex was the official there, and Ken was the referee in charge, or the staff member. But we definitely had a lot of situations, but I think it was a good year for us for sure. All right. So this presentation, our topic today is really just to kind of go over the basics of being a rules referee. And some of you have probably heard this a couple times now, but we are changing. And for those of you that may have seen this slide before, you'll see that at the very top, I made a change to it. We're now by the rules referees, not necessarily officials. So yes, we're quote unquote officiating, but we're really refereeing. And the reason that I bring that up is that the terminology that we use when we're out there officiating or when we're out there refereeing is important. So we want to make sure we're using the terms that the rules of golf have. And I know it's a pet peeve for some, but when we're talking to players, we don't want to say things like trap and pin. We want to use the actual rules of golf terms, which are bunkers and hole locations or flag stick. So terminology is important. And we're getting better at that internally, our staff, and then we need your help as well. And obviously, the big one that I think most people are aware of, hopefully, with the changes in 2019, was the water hazard to the penalty area. So making sure and using the term penalty area is really important because golfers, golf courses, people within the state of Michigan see the GAM as the authority on the rules of golf. And when we don't talk and use the right terms, it makes us look like we don't know what we're doing. So it's really important to make sure you're using the right terminology. And I know it's possibly fixing habits and breaking habits are difficult. However, we just really ask that you try to focus and get the right terms out. And we'll do our best to help correct, and then you guys should do the best to correct us too. So if you see something on a sheet or a piece of paper that we hand out that's not right, let us know so we can get it fixed. Because we do want to be that leader in the state, that authority for the rules of golf. So as you can see, this golfer here, or this referee here is assisting the player, and that's really why we're out there, right? We're out there to help the players with the rules. We're not out there to enforce penalties or give out penalties, even though some of us like doing that. I won't mention any names, but we're really out there to help the players, whether that's to locate their ball. Um, in this case, helping this player identify their ball. They're also there to help with any questions that they might have about the rules. And in this case, this referee here is obviously looking to identify or help this player, and he's also has good form. So another important tactic that he's doing is he always keeps the ball and the player before the penalty area. So if he were to fall in, he has that help. So that's when you're getting towards the water, make sure that you're not getting too close because we don't want you to fall in. And it has happened before in the last couple years. But really, like the whole point is that we're really out there to try to help the players, and we're out there to make their round more enjoyable. For those of you that might watch basketball or look at other sports and officiating or refereeing, we're not out there to handle conflicts like what happened a couple years ago with this basketball referee, where there was a call made and the player questioned it, and instead of talking to the player, he basically turned around and faced the other way and basically showed up the player. We're not there to show up the players. We're there to help out. We want to own the decisions that we make, and then also be able to talk and explain to people after the fact. Because what you'll find out is that in many cases, you're going to make or enforce a rule or make a ruling, and you're going to have questions from the other players in the group. You're going to have questions from parents or spectators. And so we're there to really educate people and help them understand what they did. So hopefully they don't mess up again. I shouldn't say mess up, but don't break the rules again. But then we're also not asking you to be like Ivor Robeson, I think is his name here, who notoriously was the starter at the Open Championship, and he would start the entire day without taking a bathroom break. We're going to allow you to take a bathroom break. We're going to give you breaks out there. You're going to get lunch. We don't need you to be super devoted like him. But we do want you to we do ask you to be responsible out there. And if you do take a break or anything like that, to let people know so that we can have the areas covered that we need to. So what are some of our goals and objectives when we're refereeing? Again, we're out there to decide questions of facts and to enforce the rules, not necessarily to give out penalties, right? We're applying the rules as they're written, not how I think they should be written or how Craig thinks they should be written. We apply them how they're written. And there's going to be a couple of these weird USGA terms, but so I won't go over all of them. But really, I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure fair competition. People are doing the right thing and acting in the quote unquote spirit of the game. And we're also trying to prevent rules breaches as well, right? So we want to make sure that if we do see something about to happen, that we step in and try to prevent it. Right. So we're not always just waiting and waiting for someone to break a rule and then stepping in. If we can hopefully get in front of that, we'd like to do that. This one here basically is just saying that we want to be out there but not in the way, and we want to be accessible but not necessarily in a place where it would cause a distraction. So if you're a trouble hole official out there on the course, you want to find a good spot where you can be accessible, see the spots, the areas that you need to, but also make sure that you're not in play or not in an area that your ball might, or the ball might hit your cart and cause issues or whatever. So it's just important that you pick a good spot. If you're not sure where to go, talk with your rover, and the rover will definitely help you get in the right position. And us out there, we're performing customer service, right? So we want to make sure that we're respecting our fellow officials, our customers, and then also, we want to hear if there are situations where that's not happening when the golfers are not respecting you, because we need to handle that as well. So obviously, we want to be diplomatic. We don't want to be defensive, even though in some cases it can be. And I think, for those of you that the best example that I can think of this, at least recent example, was we had a situation last year at Forest Acres East in our junior stroke play, and Bill Latta would basically handle the situation perfectly, and went over with the parents, the kids, everything with us, exactly what happened. Was like perfect, handled it honestly as perfect as you could. Was not defensive, was very respectful. And I would admit that if I was in that case, I probably would have gave that parent a good yelling. But don't worry, one of our other officials did later, referees did later. But Bill, you handled that really well. And for those of you that were part of that, I mean, that's a great example of how to handle yourself out there.
Well, could I say one thing to that?
Sure.
The other thing I want to acknowledge too is the number of the other referees that came in and helped support that effort as well. I've got to tell you that for all of you that do this sort of thing, the camaraderie among the group was very, very helpful. And it was very reassuring and enabled me to keep that calm sort of presence, because inside I certainly was not feeling it at the moment, but I do appreciate, Kyle, your support. Mike Church was very instrumental in that as well. It was a difficult situation, but I was struck by the amount of support I received from the other referees too. So we should all know that we do kind of have one another's backs, which is important. And I want to thank everybody for that.
Right. Yep. No, that's a great point, Bill, and that's one of the things that I think, I was always taught when I officiated. I used to officiate other sports, for those that don't know. But one of the things I was always taught was that, if you're refereeing basketball, for example, there's three teams playing. There's the two teams, and then the team of officials or referees. And to Bill's point, I mean, we're a team out there. We're working together. We're having each other's back. And Mike Church got some praise there. We don't want it to get to his head. It's early in the season, Mike. So, but kudos to you for helping him out there. Here's a good little USGA quote. A brusque or officious handling of a situation can, by upsetting the player, magnify the effect of a penalty far beyond the extent of the penalty itself. And I think this, I include this in here just because I really think it's a good quote, in that we don't want to add fuel to the fire. If there's a situation, and the player's upset, the way that we handle it, the words that we use, it is extremely important. And so we don't want to use that smart ass comment, for lack of better terms. We want to handle it appropriately, and maybe not say what we want to say, but say what needs to be said. And at the end of the day, we're there for the players. We're there because of the players. So we don't want to be a factor in the outcome. We just want to help make sure that the event is played in a fair and equitable manner, and that no one is given an advantage or a disadvantage, and that all the rules are applied appropriately. So we don't want to be looking to penalize someone, or looking or waiting for something to happen and then bringing it up after the fact. We really just want to get ahead of everything and make sure that we enforce the rules as they're written. All right, some preventative refereeing um, thoughts. So again, like we talked about, we really want to get ahead and stop breaches whenever possible. So everyone is going to be a little bit different in how they handle, and I'll open it up here in a second to some other people and maybe how they handle it. But just to give you an idea of some of the things that should really determine what your level of interaction is. Some of the things you want to look at is the experience of the field, right? So the way you would handle a junior event versus the way that you would handle a senior event should be different, right? Because the senior event, those golfers have a lot more experience with the rules, probably a much higher knowledge of the rules. You also want to know where you stand in terms of the referee. Are you a trouble hole official or referee? Are you a rover? Those things matter as well. And then also, the number of people that are out there. So, and then obviously anything from your perspective, if you're not comfortable, you don't want to jump in there if you're not comfortable, but we definitely want to get help from a rover or a more experienced official to get in there and help out. And so kind of the way, like, just to use an example for myself, and I'll ask others to share, but my approach has always been to kind of sit back and wait until I think I'm needed. I don't want to jump in there unless I feel like I need to in order to stop something. And so typically what that means is that I will wait, and I like the players to try to attempt to figure it out themselves, but I'll be ready to go in when I start to see them doing something that's wrong. Another cue that typically happens that I know I need to go in is when you have a group of players or caddies gathering together in a circle, then they don't know what the heck they're doing and you need to jump in. But that's just one way. And I don't know if there's anyone else on the call, any of our other experienced referees that want to jump in and say kind of how they typically handle or some strategies for preventative officiating.
Kyle, I would suggest that the last thing that you said may really be the key, especially if you're on a trouble hole. I would say referees should be proactive. If, as you said, if they see a group gathering, they ought to be moving immediately toward, in my opinion, toward that situation so that they can insert themselves, if you will, into the problem. If it becomes something that doesn't require, if it's already been decided or actions have already been taken, that's fine. But I think you can't sit back and wait underneath by a penalty area when the issue or the problem is on the other side of the fairway.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point, Lee. I mean, yeah, we definitely want to be there to help out, and so we definitely want to step in there, especially when we know that there's going to be questions.
Kyle, this is John Allen. One suggestion I'd make when dealing with issues which arise so often at or near the scoring table at the end of the round is to plead with all the players to stay there, and also to plead with all the caddies to stay there. The caddies don't need to be actually part of the discussion, but it's nice when they're within the hearing distance because they often have good information. The one exception I make to that is when we have younger players involved and parents around. Even if the parent is the caddy, I ask them to stand back and stay out of it, at least till we get done with things. Then I explain things to them. But I find that sometimes to be more productive, and I think it also helps educate the player and how the player ought to be behaving in that situation and speaking up for himself or herself.
Right. Yeah. No, definitely, John. That's a great point. And one of the things that we always do when we're trying to figure out the proper ruling is to gather all that data that we need, and using resources like other players in the group, caddies, is a critical part of that.
I would say, Kyle, Tony, one of the things I observed early on, and I've tried to kind of use it, is just asking the player, do you know what your options are? So, rather than preaching the rule, just kind of let them talk about it and then say, yep, good to go, or help if they don't know their options.
Right. Yep. No, that's a great point, Tony. And I think that's something we'll talk about in a little bit, but something everyone should do. Whoever's phone's going off, you could turn that off. That'd be great. Thanks. And then the other thing too, in that, when we see things, we need to act, right? So we have the right, but more importantly, we have the obligation to advise the player. So if you see any of these things, you'll definitely want to make sure that you're jumping in there and doing something. So if we see a ball that's teed outside the teen area, we want to step in and stop it before it happens. Sometimes we're not there, we're not on.
You called?
And so we if we're not 100% certain, then it maybe not necessarily always the best way to jump in, but again, if there's any possibility, it's better to try and stop them than to have them get a penalty. Order of play is another thing, not so much in stroke play, because we'll talk about stroke play. The order of play does not really matter. But however, in match play, we want to make sure that we're controlling the order of play and making sure that the proper players are hitting in the proper order. Any kind of announcing or marking requirements we would want to stop. So if we see that a player is trying to identify their ball, and they're not going to mark it, we want to yell at them and tell them, hey, make sure you mark that when you're picking it up to identify it. Anytime that cleaning is permitted or not permitted, I typically will tell that or work that into the ruling. So they'll pick it up from the cart path and they'll say, okay, where do I go? And then I'll tell them, okay, you get your nearest point of complete relief plus your one club length relief area. And then I typically add in there that, you can clean it as well. And then if we have a ball marker that hasn't been returned to its original position, that's one of the things that when I'm ever around a green and in my cart around the green, that's one of the things I pay attention to, is if I see someone move it out of someone's line, I want to make sure that it gets turned back. And then I think that the biggest thing, and one of the things that I didn't talk about before, but one of the other things too is that, and I think we're all a little bit maybe guilty of this in some cases, but we really do want to get the situations handled prior to them happening, right? So what we don't want is for you to do a ruling and then tell us about it after the fact, and then we find out that it's not right. So if there's any ever doubt or you have any doubt whatsoever, call someone, get on the radio and ask. It's not a sign of weakness to ask the question. It's a sign of weakness to do a wrong ruling and come to us after the fact and say, well, I had this happen here. And I mean, every time I have one of those questions, I just cringe because I know what's coming in, that they messed up the ruling. And we're not going to get angry at you. I think everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but most everyone on this call has probably had a bad ruling before. And if you haven't, you just haven't worked enough tournaments yet. But it really is best to ask. And one of the things that I think, in different organizations that I've worked at, the more talk on the radio about the rules, the better. It's good for people to learn. it's just good. It's just good to have those discussions instead of doing something and hoping that you're right and then finding out later that you're right or you're wrong. So don't be afraid to get on the radio. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You know, one of the ways that I recommend is that you, when you're on the radio, let's say you're not 100% sure of all the options for an unplayable, you would come over the radio and say, all right, I've got a situation here where the player is going to take an unplayable. I just want to go over the options with you to make sure I'm correct, and then list out the 3 options. And then the rover or official in charge or staff member will say, yep, that's correct, and then go from there. So it's not always just asking the question. You can try to answer the question in the question when you ask it, if that makes sense.
Kyle?
Yeah.
In a general term or situation, the difference between refereeing a match versus a stroke play event, and again, trying to avoid penalties. There's always been some discussion about whether the referee should be inserting himself. Let's say a simple one where one of the opponents is teeing up outside the teeing area. Do you stop that, or do you let that happen and expect his opponent to make that call? My general feeling is that we ought to be inserting ourselves, or I certainly have in the past inserted myself to stop that from happening and not leaving it up to the opponent. But that's the discussion, right?
Yeah. So I think that is a good question, because at least the way I would interpret it, or the way I would answer it, is that the answer really depends on if you're playing stroke play or match play. If you're playing stroke play, yeah, you definitely want to say something because it's an automatic penalty. But in match play, it's not necessarily a penalty. So that's where I would say that it probably depends.
No, I was trying to preference my comments and saying during match play, you're right, there is a difference, but still, I think it's appropriate to stop that from happening regardless of what the opponent says. But that's the discussion. So is there discussion, or are we just going to leave it wide open?
I think it's a good question to ask.
Kyle, I would argue that it is a rule to tee within the teeing area for both stroke and match play. The same, and also it is a rule for order of play that the ball further away is to be played first. And that's the rule, and we should avoid breaches to that rule. There's no penalty to that rule, but it's still a rule that we need to, I would say, step in and make sure it is not breached in that instance.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, that sounds good, Mary. Sorry, Craig, I had to do that. Your thing says Mary, but that's all right. No worries. I think most people know who you are. But yeah, so I think that's a discussion. I mean, I think, yeah, if we had to decide here right now, yeah, it's probably better to step in there. But you know, again, you're not necessarily penalized. So I don't know. I think that's a philosophical question that might need some further discussion. But for now, step in there. And I think too, like the other thing that I would say to that too is a lot of it depends on, you know, the level of the event too, right? If you're at our 14 and under match play and it's their first time ever playing match play, like you probably want to step in there and say something, you know, for sure in that case, because they probably don't know any better. All right. So as Tony referenced earlier, when we're giving a ruling, one of the best ways to start that is to ask the player if they need any help with their options, or something similar. Do you have any questions? Something to have the player help explain to you what's going on. And then it's on us to determine the facts of the situation. Who was involved? What happened? Where did it happen? Because the part of the golf course where something happened, matters. When it happened also matters. So we have to determine all this situation, or all these scenarios, because the answer to those questions could determine the actual outcome of the ruling. It's never a bad thing to consult your rule book. It's not a sign of weakness. It's just we want to make sure that we get the answer correct. And so looking at your rule book is good, and we recommend that so that you make sure. And I think just from my perspective, one of the things that I always do is that, especially on a severe penalty, so like a disqualification or a general penalty, and I'm 100% checking that 2 or 3 times in the book to make sure before we give out a penalty of that severity. Obviously we can fix things if they're mistakes, but getting those fixed in a proper time frame and it also impacting the player, there's just a more gravity to those decisions. So it's important that we double and triple check before we give the player an answer. And like we talked about before, if you don't know the answer, don't be afraid to ask for help. We have our rover will be out there to help. The staff will be available to help. Other officials that might be nearby, or referees that might be nearby, we're here to help. And then typically I always end the conversation that your ball's in play or you're all set, you're good to go, so that they know that after they've dropped their ball and put it in play that they did everything correctly. All right, so some good practices when giving a ruling. It's important that we take our time, right? So golf is a little bit different than other sports, or you need to make an instant decision. In soccer, if the ball is or if the player's offsides, you have to make that call right away. Or in basketball, if it's a block or charge call, you need to make it right away. You can't wait 10 seconds or 15 seconds and then make it later. But in golf, we have a little bit more flexibility. So we want to make sure we give them the right ruling. And we also want to make sure that if we need to, that we can show the rule to the player. That's always a good idea, especially if you have a player that might not believe it, or you might be in a situation where the player thinks they know more than you, or the parent or whoever thinks they know more than you do about the rules. Showing that rule, showing the wording, not only helps that those people learn, but also provides credibility to you as well. It's always important, and this is more for our rovers, but really for everyone, is that we don't jump to conclusions. We want to make sure that we're hearing all the facts before we decide, because there are little things, little oddities that could impact the ruling. Whether something happens on the teen area or in the fairway or on the putting green makes a huge difference in the ruling potentially. So we want to make sure we have all the situations and that we're hearing everything before we really get the final answer out there.
Kyle?
Yeah.
Going back to making the rulings, in a lot of the junior events, I found I have to be careful when I'm given the options to the junior. I have to be careful not to really be giving them advice, because they look at you with wide eyes and what they should do, but you have to just carefully explain all the options they have. And when I look back on it, I might have been given advice once or twice, but don't tell anybody.
Yeah, yeah, Mike. Yeah, no, that's actually a great point. And I'm glad you brought it up because yeah, I mean we obviously we want to make sure we're giving the players all the options, but we can't really tell them to use one or the other. And so one kind of trick that I use for that is that I will typically when I'm giving the players the options, I will give them the option first that I would think is the most practical, and then I will typically actually go over that option again at the very end. So if they're taking relief from a red penalty area, I'll tell them that you can take 2 club lengths from where you last crossed the edge of the margin. You can go back to where you last played from. You can take a line back with where you last crossed the flag, and then I'll tell them. And then again, keep in mind you can take 2 club lengths as well. And so that typically, I mean, it's not giving them advice; it's just telling them their options. But it could potentially, just give them a little hint as to which one they should do. Some people might not like that, and I'm open up to people thinking about that. But at the end of the day, like we want to help the players, but we don't want to tell them what to do. But there's subtle ways to make that happen. Oh, the one example I wanted to talk about here under good practices as well is that I'll use an example of from one of my past experiences. We had a tournament at Kiowa Island on the ocean course that I was at, and we had this player that just would not believe the ruling that I gave him. And so I showed him in the book. He still didn't want it. He's like, no, it's whatever. Because the question was there, and if any of you've ever been to the ocean course at Kiowa, there's a ton of sand, and the sandy areas are all over the place. And his ball was embedded in one of these sandy areas, and he wanted free relief. But one of the what's the word I'm looking for? One of the exceptions to the embedded ball rule is that they don't get relief in sandy areas. And so I had to actually call one of my mentors and get him on the phone and have him explain to this player what the ruling was. And then after that, he believed it. But so there, you can do that as well. And I'm sure that has happened to people, in that you have a player that might not believe what you're saying. Then just unplug your earpiece and call the rover and say, I've got a player here. I gave him these options. Can you confirm that that's correct? And that, so they can hear it. And then when the rover comes back and says, yep, that's correct, and that player walks away, and you just walk away with a big smile on your face. But yeah, so I think it's never a bad thing to get other people involved, especially when you have people doubting what's going on.
Well, there's also, and taking your time also can mean that if you see an infraction of some kind and maybe you're not sure of whether it's a 1-stroke penalty or a 2-stroke penalty, or where the ball should be dropped in stroke play. There's nothing wrong, in my opinion, of saying, all right, either play 2 balls, or this is a penalty. I'm not sure what it's going to be. I'm going to have to get back with you and keep the play going along and get to them on the next hole, as opposed to, as you suggested, in addition to calling somebody right there and trying to get it resolved before the play is completed. So I think that's an acceptable process as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. And Marv had a good comment here too about asking questions. And one of the things that he said that is 100% true is that when we are asking questions, we never want to ask a question that can be answered yes or no. We want to answer or ask open-ended questions so we can really get that the actual truth. Because some players that we deal with are really smart and know the rules, and if you ask them the question in a bad way, they're going to know how to answer it. And some players are really good, and they're going to know the rules, and they're going to know exactly how to answer it, no matter what question you ask. But it's a good point, Marv, that asking a question and not using a yes or no is good. All right, so the timing or the way that we communicate the ruling is important as well. So the way that a decision is communicated should not impact the championship. So we want to make sure that we're doing it in a fair way to the entire field, and also doing it in a timely manner, so that there's not uncertainty as to what's going on. So some of you can remember, I forget what year it is, maybe 2015 or 2016 at Oakmont. There was a scenario where DJ's or Dustin Johnson's ball moved on a putting green, and we didn't know if he caused it to move or if it was natural forces. And basically, it took them a couple holes to figure out what actually happened. And meanwhile, I forget what round of the Open it was, U.S. Open, but there were people were trying to figure out where they stood. Dustin was trying to figure out where what his score was in relation to everyone else. And that this is an example of where it took too long to figure out exactly what happened, and that you might take a little longer to find out the ruling on the first round, but in the final round of play, when things are tight, players want to know where they stand, and we need to get a decision out as soon as possible in those cases.
It usually happens in USGA events, not so much in tour events.
Right.
But on the other hand, they used all the resources they have available to themselves to make the decision and come to a conclusion. And that's critical too, with getting the right decision, whether we agreed with it or not. Certainly we don't have the barrier of video, so our decision should be quicker than what they did in that example, but they did use all the resources available.
Yeah, Kyle, that's a good issue to discuss. I recall a situation where it was in the final. Well, it was a leader at the time. He was leading the tournament, and he called me over for a ruling. He was in a bunker, and he wanted relief for a certain situation, and I'd been on that hole all day, and many people in that bunker, and no one else had asked me for relief. And when I came over and looked at it, I was not inclined to give him relief, and he was not happy. And I asked him, I said, well, would you like another opinion? And I called the rover over, and the rover agreed with me. So in that situation where it's like you say, if the leader, he's going to want certain rulings, so you have to take that into account.
Yeah. I think, obviously, I guess that's a good example of getting a second opinion and making sure that the player is comfortable with the ruling. I guess I would just caution a little bit on the fact that we won't necessarily give certain players certain rulings. We give all players. And I don't think you were getting at that, but the other thing too is that when it does come down to the end, obviously we want to be there with those final groups to make sure that there are no issues that might arise. So yeah, it's important, especially as the tournament's getting down to closing time, that we're nearby and able to help out.
Yes, yeah. I just didn't want to give him an advantage that I haven't given anybody else. So that was my concern. That's why I call for help.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point too, and that we want to officiate the same way for everyone, and that if if we haven't given ground under repair relief or anything like that to players in similar situations, all day long, we're not going to make an exception for someone in the final group or anything like that. You might see that on TV in terms of pace of play enforcement, maybe not being so stringent on the last couple groups, but that's more for television viewing, I think, than anything else. Another scenario that occurred, I think it was 2015, is at the U.S. Women's Open, and there was a playoff between Brittany Lang and Brittany Lincecum, maybe, and one of the players, no, Anna Nordquist.
No, I just fell on the floor.
Suzanne Pedersen was the,
Yep. And basically one of the players, she touched sand in her backswing, and the only reason they caught it was because of the high def cameras that Fox was using. And basically what happened is the player hit her third shot out of the bunker, and then they zoomed in on the video and they saw it, and then they immediately went and made the decision, and then told the other player in the playoff who was in the fairway, and prior to her hitting her third shot, and before she actually hit it, she got told that information, and she went back and switched her clubs knowing that. And so I think we've talked about that the last handful of years in terms of what our obligation is. And I think it's another kind of good discussion to have in terms of, well, in that case, do we say that, hey, we have to let people know as soon as possible where they stand, and that player who hadn't hit their third shot in the middle of the fairway deserves to know that the person got a penalty? Or is it, or would it be fair to wait and have her hit her third shot and then tell her, because they're all hitting the same shots, so to speak, or they're all equal? So I don't know. I would say that probably in this case, I probably said differently last year because things change, but I would say in this case maybe they handled it right by telling her right away that she incurred a penalty, so she knew exactly where she stood. What do other people think that remember this? And
I'm inclined to agree with you. I think a player should know the status of the match, and just like you are as a player, you are obligated to inform your opponent when you incur a penalty as soon as possible. The same thing applies in match play for the referee, I would think.
yeah, and in this case here, it was stroke play, but I don't know if that necessarily makes a difference in terms of, I think you have the obligation to tell people where they stand. Maybe they could have waited, but I think either way they're okay here. I guess it really kind of just depends on what angle you're viewing it from. And then the other example that I have for this one is what happened with Lexi Thompson at Mission Hills. This was I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago now. But the USGA has since corrected this dumb rule, luckily. But I think, and for those of you that don't remember what happened, basically she didn't put the ball, quote unquote, she didn't put the ball back in the right place. And so they gave her a penalty from the round before. And this was after viewing evidence was brought in, and all this is obsolete now because they've changed it. But basically, I think one of the positive things that they did with it is that they informed everyone and anyone that was in contention what happened, so that people knew what was going on. And so I think that's always important too. Like for us, we're a little bit different animal in terms of people following leaderboards and everything like that. But now with live scoring, maybe it's more relevant. But when there is a big rules decision, and especially one from maybe previous round or from a time that's longer ago, that we do want to let people know, and it might not just be the people in the group, it might be the people that are in contention as well. I don't know if we'll ever run into a situation where we would do that, maybe at the very end of a big tournament or something like that, but it's always something to think about. We really want to get the information. We want to get, at the end of the day, we want to get the right ruling out, but we also want to get it out in a timely manner where it's not going to impact the outcome of the championship. And another example of this too is, in some cases we might run into situations where we know what the penalty is going to be, and it's going to be a disqualification or Dairy Queen, as some people like to call it. And in those cases, we may wait a little bit longer to tell the player, because he or she may be hot, and not in a position to accept that information. Or it may be someone that just did something because they're brand new to tournament golf and they had no idea, and they don't really, they're middle to lower half of the leaderboard, and it's not really going to matter, and we can tell them the scoring so they can keep playing the round and getting that experience. But there are situations where we need to jump in, and actually that reminds me, we had one last year at the women's senior up at Hidden River, and we had a player play from the wrong tee, and she actually played from the wrong tee in the previous round, and we found out the next day because they played from the correct tees. And so we had to first identify what exactly happened, and then once we determined that they indeed did play the wrong tees, we went and told the players, and then also anyone that was nearby, because it was the final day of the tournament, and one of the players was, I think, in first place or something like that in her flight. So actually we did have a similar situation happen last year. I forgot about that one. She was also one of our volunteers, so that was not a fun conversation, but she handled it pretty well, really well, all things considered. All right. So when we're studying the rules, and everyone learns a little bit differently, but a couple of things that I've been told from some USGA and PGA instructors that I've had in the past, and some former mentors, is that really knowing the definitions is the most important part. Those are the building blocks of the rules, and of your time studying, you should focus the most on knowing the definitions if you really want to get a good understanding of the rules. And then also too, and speaking of the definitions, the way that they've written them with the new 2019 rules, they've included interpretations within the definitions, which are very helpful as well. So I think if you're looking to get a better understanding, that's the place where I would recommend that you start. Really get those under your belt and know exactly what they are, because a lot of times, just by knowing the definitions, you'll be able to figure out what the answer is. And then everyone learns differently, right? So some people want to see it, video, a YouTube video, USGA video. Some people want to hear it. Some people need to read it. Some people need to do it. That's that last one there. So they need to get out there and actually do it. And that's how they really get it ingrained into their brain. But everyone's different. We all learn differently. But we all learn in those three ways really. So it's a combination of those. But find the way that works best for you. And then there's a ton of resources that we'll talk about here in a little bit of where you can find information to get more knowledge. And for those of you that we'll talk about the books here in a second, but for those of you that have an official guide, I don't know if you can see on mine, but there's tabs here with references to the rule numbers and the conditions of competition, definitions, etc. If you haven't tabbed your book yet, I would highly recommend it. It allows you to get to the answers quickly, and really is just a huge help when you're trying to figure out an answer or when you're just studying in general. And I believe JW has some resources that we have on our volunteer website with some tabs and information on that. But if anyone has any questions, we can definitely help you out with that. But I'd highly recommend that for sure. And then, as I like to say, test. Keep putting yourself in situations. Hopefully we'll do a rules quiz today on the USGA website. But just keep putting yourself out there. Pain plus reflection equals progress. So even if you get 6 out of 10, or in Mike Church's case, 4 out of 10, if he's lucky. Sorry, Mike. But eventually you'll get up to the 8 out of 10 or the 9 out of 10. So it's just finding ways to put yourself in positions like you'll be, or similar to what you'll be on the course, right? So that when we're out there, we don't panic or we don't forget, and that we have good instincts to check our book, to know where we need to look for the answer and get the right answer to the players. All right, so I think most of you know this by now, but basically there are 3 books that the USGA produces. There is the Players Edition of the Rules of Golf, which is the small one that most people are used to dealing with. Again, this is one that was written specifically for players and doesn't have the full verbiage. While it's not necessarily a bad thing to have this. This is not sufficient enough to be a referee. You definitely need the rules of golf. And I don't know if you need the official guide to the rules, but if you really want to understand the rules, you'll want to get the official guide to the rules of golf as well. And if you're interested in getting those, we do have them available, and you can contact Ken Hartman. I think most of you know who Ken is, but he will help you get those if you don't have those resources already. I said most of you probably have them, but reach out to Ken, and he'll get you those if you need them. It's $20 for those books, and we'll ship it to you.
Is that each, Kyle, or is that total?
Total, yep, total. And then the other thing too is that the USGA is moving towards more digital learning and resources as well. So if you don't have the Rules of Golf, USGA Rules of Golf app on your phone, I would recommend downloading that. Maybe some of you have a dumb phone, like one of our rules officials says. But if you have a smartphone, I would recommend downloading the app for sure.
I spoke to the USGA recently about any updates on the rules of golf, and there are no plans. The only updates will become through the clarifications that will be given every 3 months. So.
Yep. That's a good point, Marv. We're actually going to talk about a couple of those clarifications that came out in January today. But yeah, so they don't plan on making any changes, at least until 2023. All right, a couple key dates. GAM tournament registration opens on February 10th. Volunteer registration is open. We'll go through that here shortly, so you can see how that is for those of you that don't know. But that's currently open, so you can sign up for events that you want to help out at. And for those of you that are new, for how we handle people that are new. We will pair you with someone that's experienced, and you'll have someone helping you out. So we're not going to expect you to come out there and be a full fledged rules official right away. We're going to help you get acclimated and train you while you're out there. So even if you're new, feel free to sign up. We'll definitely make sure you have someone to help you out while you're out there. Your first handful of times, and until you feel comfortable on your own. And then the USJ has some options for training. I know a few of you have reached out to me about that experience, and I don't know if any of you are on the call that went to it. I think maybe Judy was, but if anyone has gone to one of these and wants to tell the group about how it went, I know there's some issues with testing that they're still working out. But anyone that's attended one that wants to say something, that would be great.
Hi, Kyle. So I just completed the very, hold on, am I getting feedback or?
Yeah.
Let me. Is that, hold on. Is that better?
Yes.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Promise. Can you hear me better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's good. So Liz Cantu, who's also on this call, also completed the first week of USJ Rules School. And it was very much like the one we attended in person, other than we were given all of the videos that they usually present, the PowerPoints, that sort of thing, to do on our own. So if anyone's planning to do that, I wish I would have known to have completed those way sooner than the actual class time, because I was really on my computer almost all day long because I wanted to make sure I was watching the videos before the 1.5 hour presentation that we had from 3 to 4:30. And so it was very easy to be able to text in questions, or actually they had this thing where you could press a button and wave your hand and actually ask it verbally. And Mark Wilson was our instructor, and Catherine Bellinger. They did a great job. I really liked it because I had a lot less wasted time doing it this way, and I could stop and start the videos. And I have the videos until the end of March. My test right now, I don't know if it's a firm date or not, but I couldn't even get a test till mid-April, which is fine. I want to spend some more time on it. And that is supposed to be proctored somehow online. I'm not quite sure how that's all going to work, but I know they are going to figure that out. But yeah, it was a good experience.
Yeah, that's great.
Hey, Kyle,
Yeah.
Kyle, I'm signed up as well, but I haven't taken the whole week yet. But they've also now started what they call night school. And I don't know if Judy had access to that, but I think it just started. But they're doing like 1 hour on Tuesdays to go over some of the rules as well. So last night was just more of going through definitions and looking at how to interpret the rules, not each rule, but just how to read them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's either once or twice a week during that whole for until April. So I don't know, Judy, did you have access to the night school as well?
Yes, that comes with our package that we paid for. And although I think that's free to anybody as long as you sign up for it, but it was a repeat of one of the videos that we were given. So I had already, and it was pretty much verbatim. I listened to the whole thing last night and plan to do, I think I'm going to pick and choose the actual rules that I really want reinforcement on, because if it's any indication from last night, I think it's going to be a repeat of our class or the videos that we have. Which some of those rules, more reinforcement never hurts, but I was really tuning in to see if there were any good questions last night, and there weren't any, but what they covered last night didn't really lend itself to conversation. So that's what I'm going to be, having listened to all those videos, and I can listen to them on my own at any given time. I don't like the 6 o'clock hour personally. That's right at dinner time for that night school. So that's going to be my first response when they ask for
Survey.
survey, but I'm sure they're doing it because of different time zones.
Cool. Yeah, no, there's a lot of great tools for people to access, and we obviously want to do our part here to help you, but the USGA and PGA, I mean, they've been doing these workshops for a long time, and they have a lot of great resources. So if you're able to take advantage of that, we would highly recommend that. All right, so just some of the topics that we're going to cover, and I think most of these are kind of firmly set, but I mean, basically we want to make sure we get over the most important rules, but this is kind of our game plan in terms of rules to talk about. Some might bounce back and forth a little bit in terms of which ones we cover, or we might get through 1 to 4 quicker than we think, but there's a lot packed in there between match play and equipment and things, and others might go quicker. But this is kind of our game plan for the rest of the winter, and we'll send this out as well, or make it available. So some of the things that, and I mean, I think most everyone here is aware of it, but I just want to go over a few things, some expectations that we have. We want all of our volunteers, whether they're tournament or course rating or governors, to be GAM member, and to understand everything that comes with being the GAM while we're out there doing tournaments. The GAM is an organization that serves not only tournament golfers, but golfers with USGA handicaps, and 500-ish clubs across the state. And so being in tune to everything that we're doing is an important part of being an ambassador out there as a rules official. So that's why we asked you to be a GAM member. Volunteer clothing, we ask that you wear your white shirt and your khaki pants. We won't get into that, but pants. And then GAM will provide you a volunteer hat. So the volunteer clothing is not quite ready to order, but when it is ready, we'll let you know, and you can order some if you don't have some already. I know a lot of you have all that. And then just some things to bring with you, and I might have forgot a few things here as well. And a lot of it depends on what time of the year you're doing this, whether it's mid-June or early May. But you want to make sure you bring your rules book, rain gear, umbrella, hats and gloves, sunscreen, stopwatch, earpiece for radio. If you don't have that, you'll be able to order that as well. And then if you're going to be making a ruling for out of bounds and you feel like you want to have string with you, you can bring that. It really doesn't. I mean, that's not necessarily mandatory. But sometimes that comes into play if you need to figure out if a ball is in or out of bounds. And I think most importantly, just bring a positive attitude, and I think we're out there to have fun, but we also have a job to do, right, in terms of running a great event and have a good experience for the players. And we want people that are happy and are excited to be out there. So appreciate that. And like I said, I think people have alluded to it on the call. I mean, it's a good group of volunteers, and a lot of you are very comfortable with each other, making jokes on each other's behalf. So some of us will even rescue us if we get our cart stuck in mud. We'll do whatever we can to get you out of those tough situations. So it's really a tight-knit group. and a great group of people to be around. We are going to ask all of our volunteers this year to sign a waiver, and it's just a waiver for that you signed last year if you worked last year, but just another waiver for COVID, and we'll send that out in a follow-up email, and definitely send it out before the season. But we will ask you to fill that out, and then we do provide lunch as well for all of our officials. So if you'll have that as part of your experience as well. And usually the lunch is pretty good.